Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS, and how are you, sir?
Yes, I'm doing very well. Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, thank you. Happy New
And
Year.
and I thought I'd start off the year with a bang. I
Mm,
wanted to discuss the idea of a socialist intrusive thoughts.
mm.
Now, just for the listeners to
Interesting
kind of
term.
just to kind of get the listeners up to speed with what I'm kind of talking
Well,
about.
what's an
Uh,
intrusive thought, 4IS?
yes, so an intrusive thought is basically a disturbing thought that somebody has that they kind of want to force out of their mind because they feel like it's not very appropriate, or it's something, I guess, subconscious, if you will,
Mm,
that they think about, but they kind of don't want to let someone know that they
right.
have it.
Bit of a
And
taboo.
well, yeah, you could say that, but I think the reason why I kind of want to discuss this today is, well, I guess a common intrusive thought is the way that people kind of paint revolutions, because it's kind
Mm,
of harking back to even the French Revolution itself, with the ideas of the terror, is that, all revolutions are about, grabbing your forks and pitchforks and your torches and that sort of thing. And I would say that there are two main intrusive thoughts when it comes to the idea of a socialist intrusive thought. Now, it definitely is that idea of, the bloody revolution. But we'll discuss later. But I kind of feel like we've kind of gone further than that, at least in developed countries. But I would say, to a certain extent, even to most developing countries, especially the BRICS countries.
mm,
But the other important idea that I think we should discuss is the second socialist intrusive thought, which is the idea of, well, I toil, I try my hardest to gain solidarity, to at least do improve things for the masses. You know, since I'm so frustrated and have been struggling for so long, why don't I let the say the capitalists destroy the country I'm in economically or environmentally, and once everyone's learned their lesson, I can rule the ashes.
yeah.
And I guess what I kind of wanted to discuss today, to a certain extent, is, look, I can understand those kind of two broad ideas, but they're kind of bad for a number of reasons.
Mm, mm. So, like, your number one there, intrusive thought for the socialist thought, let's just say revolutionaries out there, is
Mm,
that kind of that battle that one has in their mind about the violent takeover being the option to revolution. Is that what you're
yeah.
talking about? So, like,
Yeah.
taking over in a violent coup, so replacing the existing establishment by means of basically killing people and burning some public building down to the ground.
Well, yeah, like I would say it's definitely the idea of, um, you basically have to get rid of the physical institutions
Mm,
for you to change society. And as any of the listeners have noticed in any of our past, I guess, conversations, well, yeah, that could be an option that you could take, but all it takes is the solidarity and really changing your constitution. Like, for example, let's take here in Australia. I'm sure if everyone collectively here in Australia decided to turn around and, I don't know, create a Bill of Rights and say, sure, like water to a certain extent is a right, though I guess
mm,
maybe our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people might feel differently. But I would definitely housing isn't a right, but if you
Mm.
turn around and created a Bill of Rights, maybe that might be different.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, uh, being or constituting those things, bringing in a Bill of Rights without the violence is a revolutionary moment in itself. So it's an intrusive thought to think that revolution can only be done by means of violence.
Yes, and I guess to kind of walk through this fallacy as well is um, I I've actually been watching Gary Stevenson lately, Gary Economics as on YouTube, and he actually was discussing the current political climate that's happening in Europe as of now, and he
Mm,
was going into the whole idea of how recently in the Netherlands they actually voted in a far right government.
mm,
And that this has been a culmination of a trend with a lot of European countries, all the way back to the Five Star Party in Italy to obviously Netherlands recently in November
mm.
of people being disenfranchised with the major parties within their countries
Yeah.
and them turning to I guess the Donald Trump esque figures of them similarly, at least saying to their people, like in a strongman sense, their idea of, oh, we'll build a wall and make Mexico pay for it, like
Yeah.
their version of
Their
that,
version
and
of that mantra.
they've been
Yep.
stoking, the fear and the xenophobia and the in convincing people that if you trust in them, they'll be able to fix the cost of living crisis, housing crisis, all of these
Mm,
social problems which are very systemic. And of course, naturally, if this will eventually not work out because you're not really treating the causes to that, but uh,
mm,
if you kind of shift it that way, in that kind of bloody revolution way, maybe um, you might reach that end a lot sooner than what's probably going to happen in these places. So just because you create a power vacuum, it's a bit naive to assume that your people are the ones that are going to come out on top.
mm.
If you understand where I'm going with that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I do. And it's an interesting kind of situation that's happening across much of, I guess, the Western world, especially in Europe,
Mm.
Eastern Europe or Western Europe. Seeing a lot of these places which are, I guess, used to enjoying more of the fruits of their labor and their position kind of on the world stage, and have been feeling the burn of kind of neoliberal policies really
Mm.
over the last 50 years. Austerity measures have really bitten people quite hard, and like the ability for people to find meaningful work and enjoyment in their lives has completely bottomed out and just crashed. And so, like, the only thing really to do, which is what seems to be happening a lot in Europe anyway, not that it's only happening there, is to blame the migrants. um,
Yes.
and so when you blame the migrants, you blame the other. It's important to have another to always cast your fears and your retribution towards, because it's never you. That's the
Mm.
problem. um, Once you have that other character there, then like reactionary kind of politics really takes over and goes like full ball, basically. And like the workers' movement or the socialist kind of revolutionaries out there used to keep that sort of stuff in check because it was an international movement and it didn't matter where you were, if you're a working person from that nation or from without or from the outside of that nation, working people always banded together to fight the one true enemy, which is the capitalist establishment. But like all that sort of knowledge is gone now. So you have, staunch nationalism that comes up against just hatred for other people, which produces the environments that you're talking about. Yeah, and so like I think what you were saying though is that in the power vacuum that someone like a right wing stooge may produce, right? Um, are you saying that like it may not go the way that us budding revolutionaries in the progressive sense might hope for, and like if they leave, if they do something destructive and leave a massive hole in the political vacuum, it could just be filled by anyone? Is that what you're saying? And
Well,
like,
again, well, I guess it's the risk you take,
mm,
because if the current environment is, I guess, pushing the politics or the Overton window, if you will,
mm,
further to the right,
mm,
I guess unless you cover your bases in that kind of bloody revolutionary way,
mm, mm.
um, the power vacuum could go far differently
Because
than you
that's
anticipated.
pretty much what happened in Germany, right? Before the
Yes.
Nazis came to power. Like it was basically the Communist Party, I think, and the Social Democrats basically had power. And the communists tried to start a revolution, which I think was like just fought back, and like repelled, let's say, by social democrats who stabbed them in the back, but also Hitler's kind of brown shirts, I believe, his
Yeah.
Nazi party. That's where they actually cut their teeth, was fighting commies.
Mm.
And then kind of the power vacuum that was left behind after the breaking down of the large kind of social democratic slash communist kind of um, uh, demographic that was kind of holding all the power in Germany politically. After that kind of broke down a little bit, the Nazi Party really solidified itself as a unified party with a plan, and people got behind it. National Socialism was the
Well,
propaganda.
yes,
Yeah.
and I guess this might be also when I was reading Clara Matei's was it the Capital Order, I think it was called, and because she actually goes into great depth the rise of the fascistas and like obviously Mussolini and everything, because like
Mm,
really 19 I think it was 1920,
mm.
um the communists or the socialists, uh, they did succeed in seizing the means of production, but then the capitalists
Like in
aligned
Italy,
with
you're talking about?
yeah,
Yeah, in
yeah,
like northern Italy and stuff like that. Yeah,
yeah,
I've
yeah.
heard about that. Yeah,
Yeah, they actually were successful, and for a
yeah,
short period, like I think it was within a year, they were successful and they seized the means of production. But
mm,
then the capitalists, along with the fascistas and like the fascists with
mm,
Mussolini and all of that, they aligned and then they took everything back, and
yeah.
then you went from one extreme to the other
Yeah,
extreme.
yeah, yeah. Because that's pretty much the birth of fascism in a way. It's like they were employed by the capitalists to break the legs of striking people and communists. So
Mm,
fascism kind of has its roots in this kind of mercenary relationship with the capitalist class, as it basically just it does its dirty work.
mm,
Basically, it's like a hired goon. Fascists are hired goons for the capitalist class, who end up taking power and like kind of cut deals with the capitalist class to make their society or their vision for society work. So you probably have something similar developing now in the Netherlands and other places in Europe for us. Reactionary movements that are based on, kind of this very, very ad hoc coming together of the existing economic establishment with whatever populist right wing puppet comes to power at the time.
mm. And this may be a product because currently I'm reading the book Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman, and he's talking about the whole idea of the term utopia because obviously from Thomas More's book of the same name, and he talks about like obviously in Thomas More's book, like the whole idea of utopia is naturally like like it always reflects the time that that said utopia is thought about. So let's take the classic one from the Bible of Moses and the Jewish slaves walking through the desert. That utopia that Yahweh or God tells them is that I will give you a land of milk and honey. Now, when you think about that, that utopia makes complete sense. We're talking about slaves that had been enslaved by the Egyptians, and naturally, people who are poor and hungry are going to think of a land of milk and honey.
Yeah.
So, if you kind of take that idea, I think what is the reason why we currently have our politics going to the right, and like say for example in the Netherlands or Sweden, all of these seemingly progressive countries up until this point. And you got to think that there is no utopian thought. And what I mean by that is there's a lack of vision in the
Yeah.
current
Yeah.
leftist way of thinking, or at least
Mm.
the way of structuring things. And definitely, what needs to be taken into consideration is, well, what was achieved in the 19th and the 20th century? Like, what sort of ideals or what sort of utopias appeal to people?
Mm.
So,
Mm.
I guess in
Because
the
like I
19th.
think utopia itself then, like from a revolutionary perspective, has kind of become an intrusive thought, actually. And like people aren't allowed to openly suggest utopian kind of stuff. Like that's considered nonsense to revolutionaries and socialists and all that sort of stuff. Today, to think of utopian socialism is kind of like, throw back to the simple days where socialists were, uneducated and idealistic before Marx and Engels came along and showed us the scientific route to socialist revolution, like all that sort of stuff. So, like, just the idea of having, this utopian society as a result of the revolution is intrusive, and it is to be shunned, and you are to be ashamed of having utopian ideals, right?
Look, you're not wrong. Actually, I didn't think of that as a third point. That the whole idea of utopia or thinking of a better tomorrow, actually, but not even that. It's the idea of being sincere. Like
Mm,
because let's think in our, I guess, Marvel-esque world where either something has to be made the butt of a joke or be made cynical.
mm,
Like I guess like your Deadpool type characters that have to wink to the camera and say how crap something is. Like that's the whole point of, I feel, of the word cringe, is that whenever someone is being sincere or saying how much they love something or wanting to show their ideals, that's the reason why the word cringe gets thrown around the internet. And
mm,
that
mm.
might be part to what you're saying is that in, like, I guess that progressive intrusive thought is, well, the idea of utopia is dead in that world.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and it's not allowed either. You know, it's more than it is dead. But like, yeah, it's not acceptable to think like that. It's almost childish to think of utopia as a result of some type of revolutionary moment or something like that. It all has to be based in rationality and science. Damn it. So yeah, I think that's an intrusive thought in itself, but like it doesn't have to be an intrusive thought.
No.
And it shouldn't be an intrusive thought. Where like something like the idea of that revolutions are these bloody moments, and like they're about like killing the establishment that precedes you, and like kind of cleansing the earth of everything that's happened before you, like literally cleansing it, in like a sea of blood. I think that is not an intrusive thought as much as it's what people confuse revolution for. But if you're a well versed revolutionary, someone who understands how revolutions work, how socialism works, how the last 200 years have worked, it can be to that type of person, it can be an intrusive thought. It's easy to just be like, you know what, instead of reforming something's or like going through a peaceful way of doing something, maybe via consensus or some type of democratic process, wouldn't it be easier just to kill everyone that opposes you and institute some type of hardcore regime with a vanguard party that just makes sure the ideals of the revolution are upheld? That's an intrusive thought in that sense, I think, for us,
Well, yeah,
because
but
it's
also
it's easy. It's
yeah,
easier anyway.
but I guess what you're also getting at as well is that what that also ties into why that's an intrusive thought is, well, socialism and communism has been trying to walk away from uh, authoritarianism and tankies basically
Mm.
for the
Well, like
for the
I,
last.
it's not just tanky. I would say it's a very Leninist thing, to be honest. He started this like in a
Mm.
19th century, 20th century context. Um, yeah, he started it.
Yeah, look, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you put out any sort of socialist mindset on the internet, you're going to get every second or so comments. You're going to be like, "Oh, authoritarian, blah blah blah." Oh, well, are you going to send everyone to the gulags? Or oh,
Yeah,
I don't want to starve to death. Like,
yeah,
why do you want to do that to people? Like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
you like not only is it the capitalist propaganda, but
Mm,
it's you obviously want to stay away from uh, that sort of complicated situation
mm, mm,
because naturally uh, you want to be on the front foot with these sort of things, and having to explain the complex relations and history of the Bolshevik Revolution, and how Stalin came to power, and
mm,
how
mm.
he stopped. He changed, state capitalism, and said that they had found communism and all of
Yeah,
that business. Like trying to explain that in a minute to someone, you're not going to.
yeah,
So,
yeah. But I do think it's important. The other intrusive thought that you raised before, which I think is something that like revolutionaries and socialists today are quite prone to, is that like thought that you get in the back of your mind where like why bother trying
mm,
to actually work towards the revolution? Why not let the system as it is just eat itself, and we'll just rise up from the ashes. So basically let the world destroy itself and eat itself alive, and then we'll try to institute some type of socialist reform or some type of new socialist society that can rise from that. And like if not even just sit back and let the world burn, but even accelerate it to a certain extent if you can. Throw
mm.
some more, you know, petrol on the fire and see how fast we can have this thing burned down to the ground so we can get to our own aims faster. That's, I think, a very intrusive thought process, one that many of us are probably very prone to. One that's probably easy to have, but like it just has that air about it that it's not right. It's probably not the best way to let things go. Just letting the system kind of crumble and hoping that the right people are there to take the helm, and forge the new society that we'd all like to see.
Well, yeah, no, you do raise a good point of there just being just assuming in a naive fashion that somebody will uh, like a philosopher king will naturally just step in and make all the right decisions
Yeah.
because, well, not only the reason that I said before about the power vacuum, but also too, assuming that in an unstable society, that doesn't necessarily guarantee class consciousness.
Mm.
I guess it's almost a contradiction in a sense because you've directly said like, "Oh, stuff this. I'll just sit back and let the world burn." Like, for you to then turn around and when the world has burnt metaphorically, to turn around and be like, "Okay, everyone, let's come together and fix everything." Um, you know, actions speak louder than words. Like for
Mm.
you to
Mm.
just assume that everyone will come together nicely. Uh, I think you're being inconsistent there, and the damage is already done by that point.
Mm. Mm. So, like, sabotage isn't the way to go. It's an intrusive thought.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
but
Is it an anarchist kind of way of looking at things, though? Like, I'm just trying to see if there's any type of link there. Because, like, they are all about breaking down to rebuild the system. Is that not the same? Is letting this current system devour itself and crash in spectacular fashion so it can be rebuilt again? Is that anarchism?
well, I don't think that they specifically want to burn it down, but I
No, but like you
well
know how
then
like
what?
they would dismantle something to put it back together again, right? So like a power
Yeah,
structure
that's true.
might be important to a certain degree, and so you tear it down and rebuild it in a certain image so it serves a purpose, and then you tear it down again. That involves in the tearing down the anarchists, right? There's a level of control there because you're tearing it down. But like what we're talking about is letting the system, so the current capitalist mode, let's say, destroy itself. So sitting back and just letting
Hmm.
it devour itself and implode, and then swooping in to kind of rebuild everything from the ashes. Is that akin? Just in
Yeah,
your
yeah.
mind, is that akin?
I think that's where the intrusive thought comes in, is that it's the it's the belief that, yeah, you let the current snake eat itself, and then after it's completely destroyed itself, then you swoop in and magically fix everything.
Mm, mm.
Which, well, look, maybe it might work out for you, maybe it doesn't. Like, we're dealing with ifs, buts, and maybes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's an easy, intrusive thought to have. It's like very nihilistic, I guess you would say. What's the point of anything, man? Just let it
Yeah,
let it burn down, and we'll figure it out later.
but I guess the reason why it is intrusive is that, well, that's not what revolutionaries are about. They are about
Mm,
what I was talking about before
mm.
with utopias. Like they, yeah, like I, if you aren't if you are nihilist, what are you doing being revolutionary?
Well, I think
I
there is a nihilistic kind of perspective when for one to be an anti-capitalist in a way. Like you kind of have to understand that the capitalist system is done for and it's not going to redeem itself in a sense. And so therefore we are all doomed if we continue to live in this existence, right?
Yeah, well, okay, I guess maybe this is a half glass empty, half glass full
Mm,
scenario. It's just
yeah.
rather than you saying, it's just the way I see it is rather than you saying, oh, uh, everything's bad, we need a better process.
Mm,
It's just when I think of great revolutionaries, I thought they think much more in the half glass full scenario of, this is my vision for the future. This is how I lead people to a better future.
mm,
Like,
mm,
by all means, they could be reacting to their current situation, but always at the forefront rather than I guess, the short-term thinking. It's always the long-term thinking, and then dealing with the short-term thinking, not the
Mm,
other way around.
mm, mm.
But you know, that's just me, I guess. But
Yeah, no, no. It makes sense. It's a very positive way of looking at things for us. We'll stick with that.
I guess to kind of go full circle with what we were saying about utopias is that, yeah, I just really can't think of in the 21st century, I don't know, like a Karl Marxian vision or even a Lenin-esque vision of what is a progressive or a socialist or a communist like vision of how to lead into the 21st century. Um, I guess first of all, you would have to take into consideration, I guess, everything that Marx had analyzed in Das Kapital, and you know how the capitalist mode and how capitalism works, and then take into the consideration, I guess, of you know the welfare state, and you know all the way back into the establishment of the middle class and social security and the idea of Medicare, blah, 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 taking that into consideration. But then taking whatever thing that neoliberalism has turned working people into nowadays and thinking, okay, well, how do I galvanize people and uh, somehow reconcile individualistic and collectivist cultures and coming together. Like, I guess until we can solve that, we just won't have our new utopia. And you know, I'm not a genius. I have no idea how that would happen, but
Mm, mm.
there's only one way to find out.
Yeah, well, I think then, in that sense, kind of what you're talking about there is revolution itself. The idea of revolution itself, then, to the average person, is an intrusive thought. Most people would
Well,
think that, like, because most people, I would say, or if not most, a lot or enough, are dissatisfied with the current system, and they
mm,
feel that intuitively. They don't know how to articulate it or put a label on it. And like if the thought ever came to them of some type of revolution, because the word is definitely in the vocabulary. People
yeah,
know what revolution is. It's not just revolving around the sun. People have an
mm,
idea that when the revolution means, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, something like that. Burn it down and bring down the establishment, so on and so forth. It's in the vocabulary, but I think revolution is an intrusive thought to most
yes,
people because they also at the same time think it's unrealistic and that thought needs to be shunned and not talked about. And so I guess then our job here on the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast is not to be geniuses and map out the new utopia, but stop the word revolution from being an intrusive thought for the average person out there for us. And that's a
yes.
challenge that I would like to take on myself. There's my New Year's resolution for you. 2024.
So rather than a New Year's resolution, you'd rather a New Year's revolution.
Thank you. Thank you. I, I, I wish I'd thought of that. Uh,
Okay, no, we're establishing. I guess we're establishing things here on the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. So, you know, last episode it was Merry Elfmas, and
Merry
now
Elfmas. Yeah.
the very next episode after that is always the New
It
Year's
is the New
Revolution.
Year's revolution. Yes, very good. I like that. I like that. We're in our own festive occasions. Yeah.
Yeah, like let's extend the net. Like, I guess if revolution as itself is an intrusive thought for ordinary people,
Mm.
is there anything else revolutionary that you think would be the case?
Like intrusive for the average
Mm,
person.
yeah.
Um, no, I think well, like utopia for the average person would be the same. Like I think people really don't think that that's like plausible at all. as much as like socialists would and revolutionaries would nowadays, the average person would not think. Well, like yeah, the word utopia is kind of silly, isn't it? It's kind of stupid. Like you're not gonna have a society where people are actually function properly and like people are looked after and people are happy and all that sort of stuff. That's just a fantasy. It's just a dream. So it is an intrusive thought to think that people could kind of live together in some form of harmony, um, and be provided for. That does seem to be intrusive and laughable.
Well, and I find it so funny, that sort of thought to begin with, because again, going back to the book that I was reading by Rutger Bregman, I just finished the chapter where he was talking about how Richard Nixon in the 1960s actually had he established the war on poverty,
Hmm.
and he was going to institute, and you know, he, like, one of his advisors actually was Milton Friedman. He was going to institute a universal basic income in the US.
Remember we had that podcast and I was just like, oh, it was Milton Friedman that came up with the idea of the UBI, and you were like, what? What?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I finally read a book where he
yeah,
actually is discussing that.
yeah.
Yeah, Milton Friedman was one of the founders of this sort of idea.
Uh,
But what was fascinating about it is that it was the culmination of progressive as well as conservative thinking coming together in order to solve a problem, and
mm,
that's actually what Nixon found so appealing about this idea. Is like, oh well, I've got this golden goose sitting in my lap.
mm,
I will, I'll jump towards it because not only is it a benefit to me, but then I can see how this plays out, and I can wipe poverty from the US, which is a massive problem, and it'll be good for my budget because it'll save us all this money. Because that was what was happening with, I think there was a pilot study in Seattle, and there was a pilot study somewhere else, but however, his advisors couched his rhetoric in a lot of the conservative mindset that we kind of know today, as in like, oh, the poor. It's on the poor for them being poor. They should
yeah,
pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
yep,
Are they the deserving poor of what they of this benefit, et cetera, et cetera, et
mm,
cetera.
mm,
And he could get it through Congress, but he couldn't get it through the Senate. And suddenly the idea washed away. When surprisingly, I think it was that they found in one of the I think it was the Seattle pilot study that there was an increase in divorces. So, and his party was entirely against that. But then I think 10 years later, they discovered that there was a statistical error, and that actually wasn't the case. But the damage had been done by that stage.
mm,
But the reason why I kind of bring that up is that, well, really, progress is only a decision away, and
yeah,
one of what would have been one of the most progressive things in the US, and plus, for all we know, if one or two things went Nixon's way, and I don't know, maybe the Senate had passed that UBI. Maybe we could have been living in a completely different world, and I'd be speaking to you as saying like, "Oh, well, why can't everything be as simple as UBI? I get my $1,000 check in the mail every month. Why can't other progressive things be just as simple?
yeah.
Like, for all I know, the US could have instituted that. That could have just had a butterfly effect. But ifs, buts, and maybes.
Oh yeah.
And you know what? I think with that, we've had a very good discussion today. So let us go with the last part. As always, what is that synthwave art? And this is just the straight prompt of socialist intrusive thoughts,
Yeah,
and it gave
right.
me that.
Very interesting interpretation.
Yeah, I take it they're assuming that socialist and communist countries are always
Like soldiers.
military esque.
Yeah,
Yeah, military esque,
yeah.
which
But like the interesting headphones are wigging me out. So,
yeah, I'm wondering if that's the prompt of the intrusiveness.
mm, mm,
Maybe.
yeah, I guess so. Maybe it's part of the propaganda and the brainwashing machine that happens in these evil socialist countries.
Well, with that, um, remember everyone to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll give it to you, Mr. A.
Thank you very much, 4AS, and to all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.